Now I'll go into sharing about the key doctrines that is being portrayed through the book of Genesis. So, obviously, as I previously talked about, the book had to do with the beginning. And at the very beginning, only God was there. He self exists and he was there forever and ever. So, um, so in terms of teaching who God really were, and Genesis gave us a very good and solid idea. So God was the creator. He created all things while there was nothing at the very beginning. And he's also the one who holds all authorities. He's eternal, almighty, and being able to cause things work according according to his plan. And also we can see God's character through the book as well. How he was so good. He made all things good as well. Um, and how he's also being holy. He does not want to have things that are sinful to associate himself with. That purity and holiness of God is what we should revere. And he also was full of mercy. Even in times of judgment, God would give men a way out. He gave men a chance to make their own choice and decision. And and also he was very faithful to his promises. So through the example of how he promised Abraham, we could see that, yes, indeed, whatever God promises will never fail, and they will come into reality in due time. And last about God's doctrine about God is he is the one who provides. He rules all things. He make things happen to follow his purposes. Just like how Joseph testified at the end, God meant it for good. And so even when Moses, Joseph had to deal with a lot of adversities and difficulties, um, Joseph had that realization. Everything out of God is out of his good intention, and he provides during his lifetime. And the second doctrine we can learn, from the book is having to do with all of us, humanity, the preciousness of man. We were created in God's own image. We were just like God in terms of our character, our person, and that's how we can also communicate with no hindrance today, especially after we are born again. And so if we have God's image and likeness in our person, that really show how glorious and honorable we are. And so do not let anything negate our dignity, and also don't let anything cause you to lose the authority that God had given to us for us to reign. And one day, um, when the Lord returns to receive the church after the 7 years of tribulations on earth and the wedding feast of the Lamb, in heaven, then we'll come back. And during the years of millennium, we'll rule with the Lord. And afterwards, we'll all go into the sweet eternity together to continue to expand God's kingdom. So that's, what God really longed for all of us to participate. But on the other hand, we also have our own responsibilities. Yes, God wants us to rule. God wants us to help him govern all other creations. But on the other hand, we need to do our part. God commanded man at the very beginning, multiply and occupy the land. And that's what we should keep on doing, and producing and saving people so that they can return to God and enjoy all grace and blessings in God. Um, and the third point regarding humanity is our nature. Like I said, we have God's image and likeness. We were created to be good, and God saw that it's very good. And also, we should have that conscience that ability to discern what is good and evil. But obviously, if we are still sinners, we are still indulging ourselves in sin, then our judgment would be clouded, and we may not be able to fully see clearly to make the right choice and right decision. But now we are Christians, we are God's follower, we are children of God. Then all decisions that we are making today should be according to God's moral uh, standard. That's why, like, all the choices we make, they matters. And also were designed to have the right channel to communicate with God. The spirit, when God breathed his breath into our nostril, he gave us the spirit. And that is the spirit that we have compared to other creations that they don't have. And and we have this spirit to help us communicate with God and also to build a relationship with him as well. And the book of Genesis also talked about sin, the beginning of sin when Adam and Eve sinned against God in the garden, and that's when sin first came into um, man's history, and also it revealed the impact of sin as well. When man committed sin, it's a death to the spirit. Man could no longer face God, and also it caused man to uh, experience experience physical death as well. Uh, I previously talked about how all those people in history at the very beginning they all lived long, long life, and without sin coming, they could have been with God, living with God still now, So that's the impact of sin, and sin also um, cause relationships to be broken. For example, like think about Adam and Eve, their family, Cain murdering Abel, how much tears and sorrow, that would bring to a family. And it also would go ahead and corrupt, others too, because sin can spread out very quickly and cause very negative impact to a point where, God would have to use flood to judge the world in that generation. And sin will keep passing down, if we do not stop it, so that's how we can see the sin, the impact of sin as well. That's why when the Lord came to achieve that perfect salvation, he wiped away sin once for all. For those who are willing to accept his salvation, to allow his blood to cleanse us, to become righteous again. That's where, the doctrine of salvation would come in. In chapter 3 of verse 15, um, it even from that simple verse, we can see, yes, indeed, there will be a Messiah, there will be a Redeemer, a Savior who would come and um, um, get rid of sin and also defeat Satan, defeat sin. And but on the other hand, yes, the Lord did what he had to do to provide us with a way to overcome sin, but we have to do our part by accepting that salvation and also keep on living by faith. And that's the example of Abraham. When he believed the Lord, he followed God's guidance, even offering, his only son at the time, he was still willing. And also salvation, on the other hand, it also can show to us it's also God's grace. It's a free gift. We did not do anything to earn it. Rather, it's God's gift for us. That's why, when Noah, he found grace in front of God, and God gave him the um, commandment to build the ark to as a way to redeem the people in his generation. Um, and then God also, preserves, like think about how through Noah's family, a family of 8, plus all the animals in pairs, then there would be a new beginning after the judgment through the flood. And also the salvation itself, um, God can show us too by instead of, yes, on one hand, he tested, Abraham to offer his son as a sacrifice, but then God prepared a lamb to be offered on his behalf. And that, God saw the faith that Abraham had. And so it's the case where, when the Lord was being hung on the tree, his crucifixion also was like a substitute for all of us. We were supposed to be the one who knelt on the cross, but he took our place. And also from this book of the beginnings, it showed to us God's covenant. He basically, like establish covenants with different individuals in different periods of time. And those covenants still hold true today. For example, the covenant that he made with Noah, he promised not to destroy the earth by flood again. And he also hung a rainbow as a symbol of his covenant. And his covenant with Abraham, he promised him the land nowadays, like the where Israelites occupy, um, descendants, blessings out of his family, and also through him, he'll become a great nation and also become a blessing to many other nations. And that still hold true today. From Abraham, we Christians are descendants from him by becoming children of faith. And the Jewish people, obviously, they are descendants. And even for the Arabs, the Islams, they also are descendants, from Abraham as well. And also using signs, sometimes, we may forget about a covenant, that we may have with other people. That's why a lot of people, most of the times, we need to sign something with this document and things like that. And for the covenant that God established with Noah, it was the rainbow as a symbol. And for the covenant with Abraham and his children, it was the circumcision. So those are the things that will keep being there, become evidence as the covenant with God. And also, God talked about his sovereignty. He really is the ruler of everything. He's the creator of all. So from history, he also, caused things to happen in a way where it will lead the purpose that he intended to be achieved in the right manner. Even though there are sometimes, because of man's disbelief and also because of man's weaknesses, but still, God still steer, like clearly toward things to achieve out of his own intention. For example, like um, the promises that he gave to Abraham, you can see from Genesis how God directed, things happen from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob, um, and then later on through Judah becoming, like David, and then also Jesus was born in that line. And that's how God, dictate things happen. And they are all being recorded in the Bible, and we can all refer back. And also God's sovereignty over all nations, even though like the Israelites may be the chosen one, but God still he had authorities over other nations. And and through other books as well, we see how God was using other nations to um, make sure that the Jewish people they maintain their faith and they keep um, their side of the covenant to keep on following God. Even like in Genesis chapter 11, when the Tower of Babel was built, God caused them to confuse their languages, and then they will scatter and go into occupying, different parts of the land. And that's actually what God originally intended for men to do. And and then God's choosing, Abraham out of all nations, and through him keep on being a blessing. And nowadays, God chose us, the church, to become a great blessings for all humanity. And that's why like we need to go and pick up um, the gospel to go ahead and preach, and because that's the Lord's commandment to us. And even God has sovereignty, over evil. That's why, like, Joseph at the end, his conclusion were, especially when he reviewed his life, all the difficulties that he had to go through. For men, they meant evil, but his conclusion were God meant it for good. So God really hold authority in our own life here today too. Um, just believe, keep on having that faith in Him. He will direct us and walk this journey gloriously. Um, in Genesis, it also started to talk about marriage and family, and so marriage defined by God is basically a man and a woman, and the man and woman becoming one flesh together in a union. So all other types of quote unquote marriages, um, especially here in America, those are not biblical and they are against God's original intent. That's why God's blessing have been diminishing, from those who are no longer following his commandments. And also God, designed family. There's a father, there's a mother, there are children, and and this way, we can keep on enjoying the blessings as a family. When we multiply, we enjoy different aspects of love and care and giving to one another. And through this, we can also realize more about God's love. And that's why, like today, when we have a church together, it's a congregation of many brothers and sisters coming from many different backgrounds with different educational um, background as well. But we are able to come together in unity, in love, and enjoying each other's company, care for one another's well-being, and work together to glorify God as well. So this family, from our physical family to a church family, that's what God really desire, at the end. And also family, because of uh, the lineage, we are able to produce our children, right? And they can carry on our heritage. They can carry on God's blessings, within our own family from generation to generation. And that's what is being shown, here in the book of Genesis as well. And in Genesis, it also showed us many different occasions where men, um, through the act of worship, to get close to God. So worship basically it means, like it's you step forward to place a kiss, on the one you're trying to get that close relationship to. And and then when we do that to God, it's our taking our initiative to walk one step closer to God and have that intimacy and closeness with God. And in the Bible, in Genesis, in chapter 4, it talks about Abel's offering that was accepted, while Cain's got rejected. And that's how Cain, became angry and then murdered Abel. So from that example, it really showed to us that worship must be out of our faith. It's not out of anything else. It's from our heart. It's not our physical doing something to God. God knows. Even if we are offering something to Him, He knows it's if it's out of our heart, out of our faith, or out of something else just for acting out, to show to others. And worship also require obedience, meaning that we need to really understand what God really want, what God is like. That's why, like I mentioned previously, if we understand the book of Genesis, we understand chapter 1 of Genesis, verse 26, how he really created man in his own image and in his likeness. And he wanted men to rule over all other creations. That was God's heart. He wanted man to be with him, to enjoy all his creation and keep on blessing other creations. So that kind of obedience, it must be there in order for meant to be blessed. That's why, like, when Noah, when God told him of the upcoming flood, he obeyed. He led his family to build the ark together, and at the end, he and his family were saved. And Abraham was the same thing. He went through different types of testings. Obviously, he had his failures too, but at the end, the fact that he was able to offer his son, the only one, God reminded him, the only son, he was still, willing to offer. And that is the kind of obedience. When God asked him, offer me your son, are you willing? And Abraham's answer was, yes, I am. So, and then for the people in Genesis, they use building a altar to symbolize their way of worshiping and their commitment and devotion toward God. So you see from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, when they went to different places, the very first thing they would do is build an altar for them to remind them to worship God, to remind them to go back to God, to remind them to pray and seek for God's guidance and also God's grace and blessings. And on the other hand, the book also talked about judgment. And i- if man committed sin, God is a just God, and He would judge, He would punish. So chapter 3 talks about the fallen of man, um, Adam and Eve, the flood in chapter 6 to chapter 9. That's the corruptions that humanity had at the time. And then when they build the Tower of Babel, in chapter 11, that's the pride and equivalence of being with um, in the same manner with God, that kind of disobedience that caused men to be judged as well. And later on, I also previously talked about how Sodom and Gomorrah was judged because of their wickedness. That's being recorded in Genesis chapter 19. And and God will definitely judge. Here, I listed out a Bible verse, chapter 18, verse 25. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? So God had to be righteous. God had to be just. That's what God's character is. If God is not just, if God is not righteous, and he just go ahead and judge this and judge that, even if that's a good person, or that's a bad person, they face the same kind of things. No, God is a just God. God will judge man in accordance to our act, to our behavior. But obviously, for us Christians, we have the Lord who achieved that perfect salvation that saved us once for all. So God is a just God, but on the other hand, we know that God is also a love God of love. And that's why in the New Testament, it's very explicitly telling us God is love. And and because of that love, he prepared salvation. He prepared redemption for those who were not lovely. And so as I talked, for numerous times already, and in the book of Genesis, even though it talked about the beginning of things, but from many occasions, it already, give us some hints that God will prepare a redeemer. God will prepare a savior for all of us. That's the Messiah. But unfortunately, for those who do not really understand this, especially the chosen people, the Israelites, they're still waiting for the coming of the Messiah. Because when Jesus came, they did not fully accept the fact that the Messiah would come in such lowly and humble manner, becoming a baby being born in a manger and then growing up as a carpenter. They're looking for that Messiah coming in almighty power and in a very glorious manner, but they didn't see it. They didn't, that's why they didn't believe it. So on the other hand, it could also show to us sometimes traditions or um not having that pure heart to open to God, no matter how um, Jesus fulfilled the prophecies in the Old Testament that was regarding the coming of the Messiah, no matter how he fulfilled all those prophecies, the Jewish people, most of them, even nowadays, still do not believe that, Jesus was the Messiah. And and also like in when God, judged the serpent and also judged man after Adam and Eve were deceived by the serpent and sinned against God. God already there, mentioned about the seed of the woman, and also, through the seed of the woman, it will overcome the serpent as well. So those are the key doctrines we can learn, from the book of Genesis. Now I want to go to the final part that I prepared to share, which are the key persons being recorded. And like I said, I cannot go into all the details, but I could quickly summarize them, and we can learn from every single one of them different lessons, and also apply even today. The lessons of faith still can be applicable in our current day life. So there are four key persons, being recorded in the book. Those are the patriarchs, to the Israelites, and we can also trace all of us back to them because we are, like I said, the children of faith. Um, then we become children of Abraham. So for Abraham, um, his main character or main lessons we can learn is faith and promises. By faith, he was considered to be righteous, and by believing in God's promises, his life journey was filled with God's guidance. Wherever, God wanted him to go, he would go. And Isaac, basically, he's the one did not do much, did not say much, but he was that quiet son, basically being there to enjoy all the grace and blessings as being the son of Abraham. Just like Jesus, like he's the only begotten son of God. He also enjoyed and experienced every love, that's from Abba. But Jesus came to from heaven to the earth to bring this love that he had been enjoying to all of us so that we can all return back to Abba's bosom and enjoy the same love. And for Isaac, even though he did not do much, by simply just enjoying, his father's love, he kept that lineage going, and the covenant that was established with Abraham continued with Isaac, no matter how he was like. And then Jacob, um, he was even to today's standard, when he tricked his brother, when he um, using like crafty ways to gain the benefits. Even to today's standard, they still do not seem right. But God knew who he was. And through all these experiences that he had to go through in his life, he was transformed. And then he became, God changed his name to Israel. And through him, through his children, the 12 tribes, through that family, then they expand and carry on, God's covenant and also God's promises through them. And Joseph, obviously, uh, a very big portion of the book mentioned about him and how God prepared long before things happened and to preserve and also to provide for the needs in the future. So if nowadays, when we are looking at ourselves, we did not see much um, happening, but the little things that we do, the little things that we implement and enjoy today will go a long way. And it will help us later on in life when we look back. Yes, when I spend the time to draw near to God, to read the book, the Bible, to pray every day, it will lead and help me become a in an individual to bless many other people in the future. So hopefully, we can all see this, in our own life. And so let's go into a little more detail. They are all, pretty consolidated, summarized of different key persons being recorded here in the book of Genesis. So Abraham, and he's the first and fundamental, patriarch, of Israel. So he was the one who was being called upon by God, and God built a covenant with him. He left, his old place to go to a place where he had no idea what it was like. But because of the fact that he had faith in God, he trusted God's guidance. He became the father of faith. And also, if today, like I said, right, we are all children of faith. We are all children of Abraham today, and that also, through Abraham, gave us the backbone of our faith, and also, through all the teachings of the Bible, it gives us a very solid foundation as well. And previously, I talked about, how God promised him the land that he would go and occupy. It will be a greatly blessed land, even though he did not know what it is. Um, and then God also mentioned about he will have descendants. He will be a great nation. Well, obviously, it took a long time. It took 25 years. After, when he was called, he was 75 years old. When Isaac was born, he was 100 years. So it's a long period of time. 25 years is not short. It was a long period of time, but it tested his faith along the way. And God also promised to him that, he would bless all nations. So I previously mentioned, the Jewish people, um, and also the Islamic people, all Christians, we all become, being blessed through Abraham. And also God had a very close and intimate relationship with him. And we can see from the book of Genesis, in many occasions, God appeared to him. God would speak directly to him, and things like that. And and Abraham himself, when he was living his life on earth, he was on this journey of faith. Um, like I said, there was not like always victories. There were failures along the way, but whenever he experienced failure, he returned back to God. He got strengthened again, and then he's able to rise up and keep on going for the Lord. So in Genesis chapter 15, verse 6, it really tells to us that Abraham became an example for us today. And he believed in the Lord, and he accounted it to him for righteousness. So his belief in the Lord became his righteousness. So how can we see and declare ourselves as righteous? Just look at ourselves. Do you believe in God? Do you trust your everyday into his hand? So that is, our righteousness, when we follow God along our life journey. That's why, he became our example. He became a model for us to imitate after as well. And the New Testament also used Abraham numerous occasions, to show as an example of faith. Roman chapter 4, Galatian, Hebrew, the book of James. So they all have different descriptions regarding how, Abraham is an example of faith to us. And also throughout his whole lifetime, it shows to us what true righteousness is. It must be grounded in faith and not work. And so we cannot work to show our righteousness, but rather by faith, we will live a pure and holy life, and that will become our righteousness. And another wonderful element of Abraham's life is how he really obey and surrender himself in everything. And so there were numerous tests that God gave to him, and he passed all of them. And And by his following God's guidance, it really showed to us the obedience that Abraham had. And that kind of obedience, it really, just like his faith, it should become our example as well. Um, when God give us inspirations, when God call unto us to do certain things that may not be um, to our own liking, but let's follow God. Let's obey him. Let's see how and where he's guiding us next to enjoy and experience him more. And so for Abraham, like he was tested in numerous occasions and even in very extreme situation, right? So leaving your homeland, leaving everything behind, you're so comfortable, so settled there, and going to a places that is unknown to you, that is pretty scary. And also he need to keep his faith. When he was of old age, he did not even have a son out of the God's promise. Then how can I have um a family, a descendants to also have a nation? So those are the things that were testing him, but he persevered and overcame them, at the end. Um, and obviously the biggest one of showing his obedience to offer Isaac, and um, and all of this, this kind of obedience, like I mentioned, it lead to complete surrenders. Only when we put God into our life and allow Him to be the King of our life, that kind of trust, that kind of submission to Him, um, will help us live a glorious life on earth and also become a great blessing for others. So Abraham basically is a example of surrender and obedience toward God. And Isaac, like I mentioned, the Bible did not record a lot of the great things that he did, but rather him just being the uh, child of promise from Sarah, from Abraham, that was good enough. So God promised Abraham that the covenant that he established with um, him will go through, the lineage of promise, which is through his wife, Sarah, not Ishmael, when they basically took Hagar, to become, to help him bear Ishmael. So Ishmael was not um, the son of promise. Rather, he was a son of flesh. Um, so Isaac, just the fact that he was, the promised one, he received and enjoyed all the grace and blessings. And just the fact that Isaac, was able to be born, when Abraham was 100 years old, um, it also confirmed God's faithfulness because he promised to Abraham that he would have descendants. He promised Abraham that he would have a nation. So even though Abraham was of old age, even Sarah herself, deemed that how can I have a baby at this kind of age? But um, but God, kept his promises, and the fact that Isaac was born, make us see that God is truly faithful to the end. So all the promises that we have received, especially through our reading of the scripture, right? If they do not happen yet, we should rest assured that it will happen. And also, like Isaac himself, um, I also mentioned previously, he's a foreshadow of Christ. Chapter 22, Isaac was being offered as a sacrifice by his father, as God called Abraham to do. So that was basically a type um, directing to Jesus because he is the Son of God. And he was also offered, but he was offered by God himself to be a remission for our sin. And God did not prepare anything else to replace his only begotten son when he was crucified. But for Isaac, God prepared a lamb, to replace him, and that is really amazing, showing God's mercy and love toward um, Abraham and toward Isaac as well. So in chapter 22 of Genesis, it really recorded, what Isaac was like. He was a beloved son of Abraham, the only one, and he was offered on Mount Moriah, and that's where um, he was offered on the altar, and he was also very submissive and trusting. Think about it, he was um, around 5 years old at the time, and when he saw, like his father binding him, and also put him on top of the altar, prepare like fire and everything together, he did not scream, he did not yell, and he did not try to escape. And and that's just like how Jesus, when he was crucified, he was like a lamb being brought um to slaughter, without saying a word, so um but but very um at the end, a substitute was provided by God, that ram, that I've been talking about. And and also his whole entire lifetime, even though he did not do much, he basically follow, enjoy um, all the grace and blessings in his father's household, and that's all we have to do as children of God today. God would not love us more when we labor ourselves. Um, well, actually, in the gospel book, right? Um, the Lord used a parable talking about the prodigal son, and there's a elder son as well. So the elder son served and worked and labor, and that's not how the way for us to uh, get God's attention or God's love. God loves us no matter what. The Father loves us no matter what. But it's the fact that we know God's heart, we know Abba's heart, and we put ourselves in a place where we enjoy Him first, and then ministry will come second. And so going back to Isaac, like he's modeling a life of quiet faith and obedience. So he learned this from his father as well. Um, Abraham was obedient. Abraham was um, giving his whole life completely surrendered to God. Isaac, he he did not actually go through a lot of hardship as compared to others. He lived in a very stable life, in the promised land, and but his life was filled with obedience, and when even when he was the father at the time, leading the family to continue the covenant, when famine hit the promised land, he did not leave the land like his father did, and he stayed there and got blessed. Um, and then he also lived a life of peace, and that's very important because for all of us, only when we are having peace, when we enjoy peace, we are able to see God, because God is the God of peace. God is the one who, when we are at peace, we'll be able to experience Him more. So the Bible, gave us some examples on, how he lived and enjoyed a life of peace. For example, he did not fight against others for water, because in the Promised Land in Middle East, there's a lot of deserted land. Water was a scarcity, and so he simply trust that God would provide, and then he just reopened, the well to get to draw water out of it. So those are the things that it really showed to us. Sometimes we may feel like we are being mistreated by others, but just wait for God's grace, wait for God's blessings. Don't think that, like by using our own might, we can do justice. God is the one who will vindicate us. He will acknowledge and honor us in due time. So that's why, like, overall, Isaac, is also a type of Jesus. He prefigures, about the coming of Christ. And Jacob, his name was Jacob, and basically by his name itself, he actually, when he was born, he was holding, Esau, his brother's leg to come out. He would and and the name itself, Jacob, it means holding tightly, and that's why, like, throughout his lifetime, he really lived out his name, the meaning of his name. Anything that's beneficial, anything that was good, he would try to hold on to it. He would try to uh, get it. So let's go into studying a little bit more about Jacob. So he's the father of the 12 tribes, basically, and from him, because of the fact that later on, after his life was transformed, God also changed his name to become Israel, and this name became the name of the nation, and is still here, after this many thousands of years. And and the name, basically, it's also connected to the covenant, and today the nation of Israel, they still believed that covenant that was, made between God and Abraham still hold true, and they still deem that, they are the chosen one, they are the blessed one, and they are the ones that is the honorable, chosen vessel of God. And and through Jacob's life, we can see how, his life keeps on being transformed from glory to glory. And so, as I mentioned, when he was born, the Bible described, actually, he's like a supplanter, meaning that, like, he's he's holding on Esau's heel, and also the name itself means taking other people's place. So later on, right, there were a couple occasions where um, he using trickeries to deceive and also to take Esau's place as the firstborn. So all the double portion of the blessings for the firstborn, he wanted to have it. That's why, like, he used tricks to do so. So for example, he used the red soup, to deceive Esau, and take over his birthright and the blessings. And but but through that, he was chased out, of the father's household, and he went to Laban. And during the years that he was living with Laban, he was disciplined through also Laban's, mistreatments of him. So, but at the end, when he was on his way back, in on his way in back, Peniel, he wrestled with God, and he finally met God, and that's how his whole life got changed. And so throughout his lifetime, we can see, how God was patiently waiting for someone to be the most suitable to be used. Um, During the previous years of Jacob's life, it may not look very pleasant in people's eyes. The moral standard was broken and things like that. But at the end, God really made him into someone who can carry on with the covenants that was promised to Abraham. And also, we can see that sometimes when trials happened, they happen for a reason. They they are there to help us become stronger in our faith and our obedience to God, and it also may help us become more and more sanctified through all these trials. And also, when a life is being transformed, that is a life that is the most precious in God's sight. And that's why our life today too, the moment we believe, um, our spirit had been transformed, but our behavior, our conduct, and our way of life, there are still, like a lot of rooms for us to grow. But by trusting in God, we're able to overcome, all the shortcomings we used to have. And also, the different occasions where Jacob met with God, those also become like significant milestones of his life. So think about our own personal life. Do we have our own milestones when we follow God? When was the very first time you experienced God greatly? When is the very first time you hear God's calling? I still remember all these times, and I remember the moment that caused me to accept the Lord as my personal savior was when the brother took out a nail and a hammer to, you know, to hit the nail with the hammer, telling us, that's how Jesus was crucified with those big nails. And that sound, really hit my heart. I could not, imagine why someone would love me so much to a point where he was willing to die for me. So because of that love, I was moved to tears, and then I accepted the Lord. And then in my younger days, I there was one time I was sitting under an apple tree, and the book of Song of Solomon came to my mind. I thought about, yes, apple, it correlates to God's provision. He nourished my spirit. And so experiences like this, those are all very, very memorable. And I also, 2 years after I believed, um, it was during a summertime. I read chapter 6 of the book of Isaiah, when God called unto Isaiah to go for him. And that chapter, that calling to Isaiah, changed my life because I also prayed the same prayer to the Lord. I was 18 at the time. I told the Lord, Lord, I'm here, send me. So ever since then, I've been following the Lord diligently and doing what I can to serve and glorify His name as well. So for Jacob, his different period of time, there were different milestones. Hopefully, all of us, we have our own personal history with the Lord. And one day, we can all share to one another together as well. So when Jacob was escaping, the from Esau in Bethel, he saw the ladder connecting to heaven. And that's when he really saw himself that he could go to God. He can build that relationship with God. And like I said, like on his way back, before he met up with Esau again, he wrestled with God in Peniel, and that's where his body was transformed, and um, God touched his heel, and he would became limping, and that transformation, and also God giving him a new name. That's when he completely surrendered himself and follow God. And in chapter 35, in Bethel again, and it's where God renewed the covenant promise to him directly that he's carrying on because now his life is completely changed. Yes, he had that righteous um, condition to accept and carry on that covenant. And the last point regarding Jacob or Israel were um, the blessings that he was able to give out, it show how God was directing him to bless and then um, give out the the Messiah lineage to Judah. So all these, you can go and read, especially when he was giving out all the blessings toward the end, in Genesis chapter 49. And the last person, key person in Genesis was Joseph. And like I previously shared too, God caused things to happen long before um, some other events would occur, and it would cause things to fall into God's purpose. So, um, so Joseph's basically his life was preserved, when he was a little lad, and God used him later on in his life when he became a ruler with serving in Pharaoh's kingdom. Then he was able to save his whole entire family. Um, so that's why, like, when he testified it to his brothers in chapter 45, verse 5, God sent me before you to preserve life. So that was his faith in God. And that kind of faith also caused him to overcome all the hardship that he experienced in his lifetime. And like I previously talked about too, Joseph was also a type, or what we call a foreshadowing of the Messiah. And so he was rejected by his brother. Jesus was the same thing. He came to the people that he loved, but got rejected by the ones he loved as well. And he was sold for pieces of silver by his brother. And um, also Judah Iscariot, also sold Jesus with, by 30 pieces of silver. And he got falsely accused um, by, his master's wife, but he did not let up. He kept, his righteous, even though he was tempted, he did not sin. And he suffered a lot. He was imprisoned. Um, when people forgot about him, did not come back and save him, he kept persevering. And later on, when he was able to explain the dream of Pharaoh, he got exalted. So God really caused things to happen in his life, and caused him to um, be in a position to bless his own family. And that's why, like, later on, he became really the source of salvation, just like how Jesus, became the salvation for all of us. And another thing we can learn from Joseph's life is God really, through many different things that happened in throughout his life, to show that he was still in control. So let's think about his life from Joseph, right? He got betrayed by his um, brother brothers, and he got betrayed by the people that he was, there in prison with. And he was bought, to become a slave. He was imprisoned. And then later on, finally, at the end, he got exalted to become a helper for Pharaoh to rule his kingdom. And from this, we can see how God's hand was at work, and God's control was everywhere as well along the way. And evil, even sometimes, there were people who would try to do evil. The intention was evil, but God still preserved him to a point where, because that's God's, purpose of his lifetime, so that he could, at the end, preserve his whole family as well. And also, Joseph, he was able to show us as an example of what holiness and purity is. Um, when temptation come, he did not give in to temptations. When things, unreasonable sufferings happened in his life, he still kept his faith in God. And at the end, when his brothers finally realized that he was Joseph, their younger brother, he did not leave him, and he actually forgave them. And that forgiveness really will go a long way to help us, reconcile relationships, men relationships. So I listed, some of the Bible here to show how his life, manifests different kinds of God's guidance. For example, chapter 50, verse 20, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. So that's how he saw things in his life. Even though things may not happen, may not be pleasant, but he saw that, yes, with God's blessing, even adverse things can become a great blessing too. And verse 25 of chapter 50, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. So that was his also showing his faith. He know he would die, but he know that God would also bring all the people back to the promised land, even though they settle, in Egypt. But we know, later, a few hundred years later, um, Exodus, Moses was chosen to lead and guide the Israelites, out of Egypt. And he told his children that bring up, his bones back to the promised land where God promised to them. So on one hand, he really foresaw God will be faithful. God will keep his promises. God will cause things to happen that one day again they will occupy the promised land that was promised to them through God. So from Joseph's life, we can see, like purity is very important. We need to maintain our purity no matter how corrupted our overall environment is surrounding us. Um, when temptations come, don't let temptation overcome us. Rely on God to overcome the temptation. And we learn also the lesson of being patient because um, throughout Joseph's lifetime, only until later, after all, more than 10 years of suffering in different kinds of pains and rejections, he finally got exalted and he kept his faith in God. He also saw God's faithfulness too. So it's reciprocal. We see it both way. And his forgiveness toward his brother, his acceptance of his brother, um, it also showed to us today that nothing should hinder us from not loving our brothers and sisters. If they did anything wrong against us, the Bible gave us the way to help us reconcile the relationship. The Lord, He reconciled us back to Abba. He also reconciles us between, one another. So pray to the Lord to give us the strength, the courage to reach out to the one who may wrong us and clear all the misunderstandings and be in love and unity again with our fellow brothers and sisters. And last but not the least, we must also trust in God's timing. When we pray for certain things, it may not happen right away, but we need to trust that God hears our prayer and He will answer our prayer in His time. So that's why, like, throughout Joseph's lifetime, we can see how faith keep on guiding him along his journey, just like how Ab Abraham worked in his time as well. So that's the overall, key persons. And then in a very quick summary, we can learn from the book of Genesis how God is really the one who holds all authorities. He created all, and he also guide and directed man's history as well. And all things will fall into his places. Their places to his promises will one day come true. And and also we learn about sin, how sin would cause separations from God and also from one another. But God prepare redemptions. God prepare salvation for us all. And that really revealed to us, his overall love plan. And the fact that he established covenant with people that he chose, then we should also realize we do have the new covenant that the Lord, on the very last night when he break the bread and drink the cup and told the disciples that he established this new covenant with us. So hopefully you can learn about that as well. And then we learn about the importance of faith and obedience, surrendering our life to the Lord who will help us become glorious and honorable in his kingdom in the future. And and also at the end, God's overall purpose, it will triumph over all failures of man. No matter how we may fall, God will cause things to work to right, the ship back to the right path. And so don't let any of our own personal failure at the moment to hinder God working in us. And because if we let up, we give up, God will choose others to go ahead and finish his work. So treasure the commission that God had given to us and hold on to them dearly and keep working, pursuing God and allowing him to lead and guide us to finish his work. So if you have time, you may try to use some of the questions here to discuss what Genesis, had taught us about trusting in God's promises. How can we reflect God's image if we are created in His image and now we are born again? Because when we sin, we died, we sin against God, but because of the Lord's salvation, we are born again. So how can we reflect God through our life? And last but not the least, where do we see God's providence in our personal beginnings? So we may have um, different new things that we are doing, and let's see how God is guiding us. Just like the ministries that I'm doing right now, it's something new, but I really treasure the fact that the Lord had given me this to help and support the work, and may God continue to bless all of us to have wonderful new beginnings and see where He's guiding us for more glory ahead. May the Lord continue to bless you and and let's enjoy His love more and more. Thank you.